This episode of Creep Street Podcast is brought to you by Martini Coffee Roasters. Martini Coffee Roasters is not a martini-flavored coffee. In fact, it is a family-owned and operated company run by the Martini family. And while I'm sure they enjoy a good cocktail, they are all about that high-quality, smooth, flavorful coffee. Unlike many other roasters, Martini Coffee Roasters roast manually using a traditional method of roasting, most relying on sight and sound to ensure the best results, okay? This is quality, people. This is artisanal. This is handmade. This is what you're wanting. And not only that, but they also sell green coffee beans for those home roasters out there. So please support small businesses and check out Martini Coffee Roasters at martinicoffee.com. Once again, check out Martini Coffee Roasters at martinicoffee.com.
You've taken a wrong turn down Creep Street.
Of the Milky Way, I'm Maureen Bogey.
And I'm Dylan Hackworth.
And you are listening to the Creep Street Podcast. Mm-hmm. You guys made a righteous decision to listen to this episode. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, yes.
Let's get to it. If you would like to support the show, please feel free to follow us on Instagram at Creep Street Podcast, Twitter at Creep Street Pod.
Yes.
And also we are on Facebook. And within our Facebook page, we kind of have another little subgroup called Citizens of the Milky Way. It's just a smaller group where Dylan and I like to post fairly often and just kind of share funny, memes or cool articles. So feel free at the top of our Facebook page, you can just click on that where it says Citizens of the Milky Way. Click on that and we'll accept you into the group. And
That's right.
It's a blast. Also, we have a Patreon where you can get a bunch of bonus content. You can check that out at patreon.com. Give it a / and then give it a Creep Street Podcast. Speaking of that, Dylan, would you please list off our top tier donors?
That's right. Of course, the Dream, James Watkins. The Finnish Face via Lundqvist, the Madman Marcus Hall, the Vivacious Vicky McHugh, the Tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid Chris Hackworth, the Oh-So-Suave Sean Richardson, the British Bonebreaker Bex Martin, the Notorious Nicholas Barker, the Terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, and the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer.
Wow, what a glorious group of gorgeous names. And thank you for reading them so well, Dylan. If you would like to join them or to check out the other two tiers, it's not just our top tier. We got two tiers that are two other tiers that are just as sexual, not sexual, but just as incredible.
Oh, yeah.
Just as absolutely incredible.
I'd agree.
Check that out at patreon.com/Creep Street Podcast. Just a share, a like, a review, anything like that really makes a big difference.
We want to tell you a little something about our friends. Two names you hear quite a bit, the Madman Marcus Hall and the Archduke of Attitude, Adam Archer.
That's right.
Friends of the show, longtime personal friends of ours. They have just launched their own show. The podcast is called Bullets, Bourbon, and Karate. That's right, the Bullets, Bourbon, and Karate podcast.
I am so excited about this.
And what this is, these two guys, both comedians, they take a walk down memory lane going through the best and ballsiest action movies have to offer.
They also pair it with a beverage, I believe.
Yes, I believe so. With each movie, they pair with a different beverage. Yes, that's a good point.
Well, I'm excited. This sounds like a perfect way to get through winter.
That's absolutely right. And their social media is at Facebook, Bullets, Bourbon, and Karate. Their Instagram and Twitter is at BB Karate Podcast. Once again, at BB Karate Podcast. New episodes every Wednesday.
Great.
All right.
Well, Dylan, you've been working hard on something.
I've been working hard, and let me tell you something.
Okay.
It was just too much.
Are you serious?
It was too much. We have to break this story down into two parts.
Damn.
This is one of the freakiest, scariest, haunting stories I've ever heard.
Yeah.
And it even involves our good friends, Ed and Lorraine. Warren.
Those two rapscallions. Here we go. Let's do it.
So prepare yourselves, because tonight is Volume 1 of the Bridgeport Poltergeist. Real quick up top, let me just give you my damn dirty sources. For this source, I read an excellent book called The World's Most Haunted House, The True Story of the Bridgeport Poltergeist on Lindley Street by William J. Hall.
Okay. I'm excited about this. I don't know really much about this at all. It's cool to see some Ed and Lorraine Warren cases that you might not hear of all the time. They're not in the Conjuring universe, you know?
So today's story takes place in a town called Bridgeport, Connecticut, at a house on a street called Lindley Street. Now, something that's unique about this story is the family had actually lived in this house for 8 years before all the weird stuff started happening. Not your typical tale of a family moving in and finding out the place is haunted. This place didn't start off that way. Jerry and Laura Goodman were married in February of 1960. Jerry was age 41, Laura was age 36. They purchased a charming ranch-style house in Bridgeport, Connecticut, near the St. Vincent Hospital.
Okay, so far these sound like a good, sturdy American couple.
Yes. Now, let's give our listeners a little breakdown as to who Jerry and Laura are. So the source describes Jerry as a very self-reliant, practical guy, also pretty handy and could usually fix anything around the house, a devout Catholic as a boy, and dreamed of becoming a priest when he was an adult. But of course, the Great Depression came along. Work was pretty scarce, but it was also very necessary. So he had to work when he was a kid. And right after high school, he joined the Air Force. He had been working as a maintenance man for Harvey Hubel Incorporated for 23 years by the time our story begins. Jerry was still a devout Catholic by the time our story starts, and people described him as the ultimate family man. Very kind, generous, and loving.
This man just sounds like classic dad, you know?
Right.
Has a past, but like
Exactly.
wholesome about it.
Now, likewise, the source describes Laura Goodman as being very loving as well. She was raised as an only child with no child her age nearby where she grew up.
Oh, damn. So she could have been weird. This could have really backfired for her.
And she apparently also found it hard making friends growing up, too. But apparently, when her and Jerry met, it was like they were just made for each other.
Oh,
it was like
great.
she had not even had many friends in her life, and when she met Jerry, they just clicked as people.
Oh, okay. Great. That's so nice. You love to hear that.
Now, while the couple had no plans to have kids, they gave birth to their son, Gerard Goodman Jr.
Oh, wow.
on Halloween Day, 1961.
Oh, okay. Very cool.
And the source says they were very loving parents who had the baby with them at all times. They had never seen their baby son as anything less than perfectly healthy until one day a next door neighbor asked why the baby's head always hang down. The baby's head was always kind of like drooping, like hanging low.
Okay.
Well, Laura noticed it before, but she hadn't really thought about it. But when someone else called it out, she's like, "Oh, maybe it's noticed."
Well, yeah,
that.
Maybe she's like, I'm staring at my baby all the time, and you can be so paranoid.
Exactly.
So when someone else says it,
She took little Gerard to a doctor, and the doctor actually told her that the baby was healthy and all was well.
Okay.
Now, as time went on, though, baby Jerry was now about 6 months old. They were now starting to get concerned. After seeing a few doctors, baby Jerry was diagnosed with cerebral palsy. And while the family was heartbroken by the news, they were resolute. They would do everything in their power for their baby. They made sure he always had plenty of clothes, toys, especially toys that, were soft and, he couldn't get hurt with. Every week, little Jerry, he went to occupational therapy along with his parents. Because of the house and their living situation, the Goodens didn't qualify for financial assistance, so they had to cover all of baby Jerry's medical expenses themselves. So they had more responsibility on their shoulders, and plus Laura's 75-year-old mother was now coming to live with them.
A lot
right.
is going on here. Okay.
They never hired a babysitter. They took baby Jerry with them everywhere. And while he didn't like crowds, he would cry if things just got too hectic, a lot of commotion. The source does describe baby Jerry as a very happy child, always laughing and smiling.
that's cute.
So for 4 years, the family toiled away and they made things work. Most of the caring for the baby and for the grandmother was Laura, as Jerry was away at work all day. It got to a point, though, where Laura's mother's condition was so poor, she had to go to a nursing home nearby. She was there for 2 years before she passed. Tragedy would strike in 1967, when after a trip to St. Anne's Shrine in Sturbridge, Massachusetts, baby Jerry caught a cold. His condition was deteriorating rapidly, and they rushed him to a hospital. Doctors performed numerous tests. They were trying to figure out what happened, but everything came back negative. So at one point, the poor baby, his little Jerry's temperature was 109 degrees.
Oh my God.
The doctors told them there wasn't much time left.
Oh my God.
So they had Father Mark Grimes from the St. Patrick Church come in from Bridgeport, and he conducted the proper ceremonies.
The last rites.
The last rites for little Jerry, for baby Jerry. On Wednesday, September 27th, 1967, baby Junior passed away. So the very next day, on the 28th of September, after the burial, Laura had a hysterectomy.
Oh, wow.
The surgery had actually been planned for a few months. So they went ahead and had the surgery.
What else could they even go
Exactly.
through? And then it's like these hauntings and negative energies.
Right.
They really fucking get you while you're down.
Yes.
And it sucks and it's so unfair.
Now, Father Grimes had actually presented the idea of adoption to the Goodens, and for a while they just kind of put it off because they were just too grief-stricken, you know. But as time passed, they were ready to discuss it, and before long, the Goodens were in the process of adopting a child.
Oh, that's great.
Well, when word started getting around the neighborhood that the Goodens were going to adopt, they were flooded with support from friends and family.
Oh.
The source says 25 letters of recommendation were sent to the agency with glowing remarks about the Goodens, and all of these were completely unsolicited. They didn't ask anyone to do that.
That is so nice. So these are like people,
Good people.
really liked these people.
People really liked these people. In May of 1968, the Goodens got the happy news they'd been waiting for. The adoption agency was calling to let Laura know they had a child who needed a home, a preschool-aged girl from Ontario, Canada. Later, Jerry would say, "The moment I got the news at 10 a.m., I grabbed my coat and hat and I left the shop and told people, I'm going to Canada. Goodbye, good luck, God bless. I only had $30 or $40 in my pocket. As I ran by, people asked me if I needed money. People gave me, it must have been $100. It's
so nice.
It's like It's a Wonderful Life.
It literally, this is Jimmy Stewart, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's so cute.
Now, Laura was already packed up back home, and when Jerry got there, they loaded up and they were off in a flash.
Oh, that's so nice.
They were anxious but very excited to meet their baby girl. She was 4 years old, and when she was brought out to meet them, the source says she ran right to their arms. Her name was Marcia, although she'd often go by Marcy.
Oh, yes, Marcy.
All three of them immediately fell in love.
Oh, that's so nice.
And Laura would say this.
All we had before was a tiny picture that they sent a month or so before as a possibility, and that's all it took for us to fall in love with her.
Finally, some happy news.
Well, that's so nice.
Yes. Now, as we all know, the Goodens were absolutely loving parents. But if they did have one fault,
oh no,
I don't want to paint the wrong picture. It wasn't like a Munchausen's by proxy. It wasn't that.
No, yeah.
It was just because with their first child, they needed to be so hyper focused, and that it kind of those old mechanisms were still with them. You know.
Right, and I mean they experienced. I don't even know what to say.
Right, but the impression that the source gives was that they were raising Marcy with the same intensity they did little Jerry. So Laura would walk Marcy to school while carrying her books for her. She'd even walk her home for lunch and then walk her back again.
Oh, wow. She
wasn't allowed to cross the street, couldn't go up the street to play with anyone unless, someone walked with her.
Right.
Marcy was already a shy girl, and this overprotectiveness was making it hard for her to make friends. And the source made a pretty good point here. I wouldn't have thought about this. They also said, consider how Laura grew up isolated and alone without many friends. So maybe part of the reason is, Laura didn't see it as she should make some friends. Because she that's how she was raised.
Right. It wasn't necessarily like she was consciously keeping her from making friends, but it was like she didn't think it was strange that she wasn't being with her friends more.
So because of this, Marcy learned how to play well on her own. She loved puzzles, watching TV. She loved Monopoly. In fact, she loved it so much, it says sometimes she'd play by herself, but with multiple pieces. So she'd play like a game.
She'd like play herself?
Would play herself. But her favorite pastime, and it was one she had a special gift for, was art. She loved art.
Marcy.
She'd spend hours drawing and making crafts. The source also says she had tough standards for herself, too. Often you could hear her crumpling up paper when she didn't like what she'd done.
Oh,
and starting fresh.
Okay.
No erasers for this girl.
No, she was a one-shot homie. She was like, we got to do it all or nothing.
Now, as time would go on, Marcy would start to resent her mother's overbearingness.
Classic.
But she was definitely what you would call a daddy's girl. She'd follow Jerry around everywhere. A time came, though, when Jerry's hours were cut back at work, and because of this, Marcy had to transfer from St. Patrick's School to Reed Public School. This was very sad because this new school, poor Marcy was relentlessly bullied, largely because she was of Seneca heritage was her...
Oh my God. Ugh, that's terrible. You know, it's like she's already gone through so much and she was at her one school and then just to have to go to another school. Ugh.
Both boys and girls alike would call her awful, awful names.
Ugh.
And even on June 15th, 1973, when little Marcy became an official U.S. citizen, the local paper had even written a nice article written up in the Bridgeport Post announcing her and the other locals' new citizenship. The bullying even got violent, physically violent.
My God.
Early in the 1974 school year, Marcy was attacked by a boy at her school. He punched her hard in the back of the head and kicked her so hard in her groin pelvic region that she had to be fitted for a soft back brace until her injury healed.
I would kill that kid.
I would murder that child.
I would kill that kid. Oh my God, that is so disgusting.
Horrible.
Fuck that kid.
Her parents were obviously horrified, and they took her out of school for stretches at a time, and officially they just removed her from that school on October 21st.
Ugh.
So this is about a month before things really pop off.
Yeah.
Because I think she's still wearing the brace when the shit hits the fan, like all that stuff.
These just like weak ass spirits that just pick on people that are already down. It's like, what? You are so embarrassing.
They're embarrassing is what they are. So this is the setup for our story. Very tragic, obviously. The stuff this family has had to deal with is horrible. And remember, though, this is a poltergeist story. And what we've just described, unfortunately, is the perfect conditions for a poltergeist. Things don't really get going crazy till, the end of 1974. But very subtle, strange things started happening not long after Marcy was adopted in 1968. Things like small items would just show up in places where they wouldn't be.
So weird. Yeah.
The sort of thing that would be easy to kind of shrug off. One of the few friends Marcy made that was her age was a girl named Rosemarie. The Hoffmans were friends of the Goodmans. Mm-hmm. The families, they'd get together a few times a week at each other's homes. And so one of the first things that happened that really kind of got people's attention was at one of these get-togethers in 1969. So Marcy and Rosemarie, they were sitting together on a couch. Each of them were sitting at a separate end of the couch. Mm-hmm. They're kind of shy. They're talking, but kind of quiet because they're both a little shy, getting to know each other.
Yeah.
When all of a sudden, Rosemary's end of the couch began to shiver, almost like it was trying to rise. And it started to do just that. Rosemarie's side of the couch began to rise as if someone was lifting it. And the more frightened she got, higher it would rise. Finally, as gently as it lifted, Rosemarie's side of the couch just gently returned to the floor. And of course, the girl was terrified. She looked over at Marcy, who just sort of nervously smiled back at her. Rosemarie ran to the kitchen to tell her parents, but of course the adults just laughed it off, thinking it was just kids playing around. And here was something I thought was nice, though. Rather than this sort of stuff like scaring her away from Marcy, the two actually gradually became more comfortable with each other and became friends.
That is really nice.
Before long, it says they were doing things that you would expect friends to do, run around, cartwheels.
Well, I mean, what a way to break the ice.
What a way to break the ice, right?
It's like you're immediately thrust into this, like, my entire reality has shifted.
Absolutely.
And you are the only one that has experienced
share this
with me.
Right.
So it sounds like Marcy wasn't surprised by this. Was she expecting this to happen, or was it just it didn't really scare her?
I don't think she meant to.
Or she didn't mean to do it, but was this the first time anything had really happened?
This was the first, other than like objects just winding up in weird places.
Yeah.
This was the first time something this drastic happened.
Wow. Okay.
Now, the source says Marcy just a ton of teddy bears.
Oh, I didn't know what you were going to say, but it ended good.
And one of the things she told Rosemary as they were getting to know each other was that these teddy bears were her only friends. And she said she'd tell them, her secrets, but also her feelings. And kind of like you would a journal. But she also told Rosemary that she had a skill of making it appear that the teddy bears would speak back to her. And there were many times when the Hoffmans would be over visiting the Goodens, and Rosemary would find Marcy in her room, sitting on the floor, legs crossed, and her eyes closed. She would sway back and forth, and she'd be talking softly in some sort of obscure language.
Oh my God, stop.
The source says that when Rosemary asked Marcy what she was doing, Marcy explained that she was talking to her grandfather.
Oh.
That she missed her grandfather, who was back in Toronto. And she said that she was sad and wanted to talk to him, and that's how she did it.
Oh, wow. So that's what
It was
she
like
was doing.
almost like a shining.
Yes, it sounds just like that. So just to clarify, her grandfather was alive.
Oh, yes.
Wow. Okay.
So there were also a few occasions later on, starting in November 1971, when the Goodens actually called the police to report a bizarre rhythmic pounding noise that was going on at their home. Jerry would later specifically describe it as though the house was being stoned. Now, keep in mind, at this time, they don't think it's anything supernatural.
They're just like, what in the actual hell is going on?
Right. They aren't sure what it is. They're more concerned that it's hooligans throwing shit at the house or trying to harass them. So more than anything, they were just fucking annoyed.
Yeah, get those hooligans out now.
And the noises had also begun happening around Halloween, which suggested to Jerry, typical assholery. The local hooligans running wild.
It's time for teens to act like teens.
Jerry would say this.
The sound had a definite pattern, and it occurred at all hours of the day and night. The noises would begin as light tapping and then work up into an awful banging.
In fact, in one interview, Jerry said that the pounding would get so bad that if he wasn't home, say he wasn't home and he called Laura on the phone, if it was happening while they were on the phone, he'd be able to hear the pounding over the phone.
Oh my God.
So it was loud enough, you could hear it on the phone.
Over the phone, yeah.
So in November 1972, the Goodens once again had to call the Bridgeport Police Department about these strange disturbances.
Yeah.
One of the officers there happened to be a personal friend of the Goodens. His name was Officer John Holsworth. He came up with an idea to record the sounds so that Jerry could present it to the proper authorities or city personnel. This would give them an idea of what was going on. And that was the thing. The Goodens couldn't really quite explain what was going on.
Right.
So one night, Jerry and Halsworth, they stay up with a recorder, and at 3 a.m. it started to happen again. So they recorded it until it stopped. Then it started again at 5:20 a.m., and, they recorded some more. And the source says that the knocking was quite pronounced. It started in the kitchen and would almost seem to follow Jerry and John as they walked from room to room.
So now they're probably realizing, okay, this isn't, the furnace is messed up.
Right. Very much like Jeff, the poltergeist Dobby, the mongoose. It was like that, where they would hear it all through the house. And
this was when logic would have a hard time explaining this.
Right.
This is when it starts to be because it doesn't sound like an animal either.
No, right. Now, it was around this time that a particular neighbor who the Goodens had suspected was the culprit moved away. And funny enough, when that person moved away, the noise did seem to stop.
Oh, that's wild.
But of course, they hadn't seen nothing yet.
Oh, baby.
When the loud noises started back, the family was absolutely beyond frustrated. Finally, they thought that person had moved away, so they thought it was over and done.
Right.
We figured it out. It was just that dickhole.
Which is crazy, too, because I wonder how they thought that kid was doing it. How would he been able to pull that off?
Right.
That's funny that who knows what the explanation is for it, but just the idea that, of course, the activity stops for a while or pauses for a while.
Right.
To make you think, oh, you figured it out, only to then later,
right,
once again, kind of just bully you.
So they're exhausted. They've exhausted every logical avenue. They've gone to the police. They've gone to the fire department. They've gone to city officials. The firemen checked out the foundation. It was all good. The gas lines, the plumbing, everything was all good. And as every explanation was dismissed, the Goodens started to get more and more worried.
Right, because at a certain point, it's like, I mean, it's something is going on.
There
It's
was-
not like we're going to just be like, okay, it's nothing.
There was 2 explanations left. One was that it could be the underground spring water, which they did know flowed underground at a nearby cemetery, or it was something unnatural. But there had been recent efforts for developing the land nearby where the Goodens live, and they were very opposed to it. They were very vocal about this opposite. They were developing the land to like make condos or some shit. They were very against it, and they thought, is it possible that this could be like the development company trying to intimidate them? Scare them away,
That is an interesting, that would be something that I would consider.
Right. Now, this theory was easily dismissed, though, because this would happen when there wasn't even someone nearby.
Right.
Also, most importantly, the sounds weren't just coming from outside the house. They also seemed to be coming from the interiors of the walls.
Oh, God.
On top of all that, remember, Jerry himself was a handyman. He looked over every inch of the house to see what you could find that was making the noise. Couldn't find anything.
I checked every piece of metal in this house. I thought an animal was stuck, so I took apart the piping and ductwork in the basement, but I found nothing. The gas company said it may be trapped air or something or other, so we ended up switching to an electric oil-fired furnace. It has nothing to do with the starting of the basement freezer. We've had that thing for 14 years.
But here's something strange to note about the noises. Sometimes they would stop for like 2 weeks at a time, but they would always begin in November and carry on for several months.
Oh, okay, so
And
it
then,
always
I
would
think,
begin in November.
And I think sometime during the winter, spring, it would end, and then it would pick up again
In November.
But sometimes even during that stretch from November to whatever, it would stop sometimes up to 2 weeks, but then it would always pick.
And we remember there are some big things that kind of happened around that time for this family.
Yes, that's a very good point. Needless to say, everywhere they went for help, couldn't find answers. And let's make it clear, from what I can tell from the source, folks really did try to help. It wasn't like we hear some of the stories we cover where they go for help and no one wants to help them or gives them the cold shoulder. Apparently people really were like trying to help them, and everyone else was stumped too.
Right. Well, I'm sure it's because so many people could actually experience it.
Exactly. And at this time, the Goodens hadn't yet allowed themselves to entertain the thought that it could be something paranormal. I think they've pretty much run out of options, but they're consciously avoiding them. Now, obviously, this would only escalate. In the summer of 1974, Laura and Jerry claimed to have seen a disembodied hand in the window, only for it to be gone when they went to investigate. And one night in early autumn, there were 3 precise knocks. Knock, knock, knock on the front door of the house. Laura answered the door. There was no one there. But looking down, she saw freshly wet footprints on the stoop. And this struck her as odd for one particular reason. It wasn't raining outside.
Oh,
it wasn't wet at all outside.
This just makes my stomach turn, that stuff. Ooh, it just doesn't make any sense.
Jerry had begun confiding in a friend about all this weird shit that's going on at the house. Doors would just open by themselves, chairs would move from the spots they were last left. And now, Jerry, the source says, had a very sharp, clever sense of humor. And as he's telling this to a friend, his friend takes it all in, assuming he's just going along with a bit. He figured he was getting set up for a prank and was happy to go along with it.
Oh my God. I could see that happening.
Oh,
you know?
I'm sure. Well, all these things keep escalating. It's like a kettle on a stove. And on Thursday, November 21st, 1974, baby, that kettle started to whistle.
She's ready for tea.
That evening, Officer Hallworth's wife, Jamie, and their daughter, Janet, were over at the Goodens having dinner with the family in their living room, when suddenly they were interrupted by the sound of breaking glass from upstairs. So they all go upstairs, see what happened, and in the master bedroom they found that the lower pane of glass on the bedroom window had shattered. But here's the thing, it had been shattered on the inside.
I knew you were going to say that. Oh God.
The outside panel of glass was fine. Now is the time to buckle up.
Okay.
Now we're about to go to Scary Town.
If you're in a vehicle, buckle up.
The next night was Friday, November 22nd, 1974. And this would be the beginning of what the book calls Hell Weekend.
In this, just to clarify, this is not about fraternities or sororities.
Well, most of that Friday was pretty normal. Jerry worked and came home to his family. They had dinner and they chatted about how excited they were because the next day they were going to drive to see their cousin in Dover Plains. And after dinner, the family was relaxing in the living room. Mom and Dad, Jerry and Laura, they're kicking back in their recliners watching TV. And little Marcy's working on a puzzle on the carpet. And then it began. The three of them turned their heads in unison to look at the door of the master bedroom. There was a noise coming from inside. All three got up and walked to the bedroom. And inside they found that the window shade had rolled up and the curtains had fallen to the floor. The window was closed, so it wasn't a gust of wind. And they didn't want to dwell on it too much, so Laura and Jerry, they just put the curtains back up. And they turn and start to exit when there was a noise behind them. They turn around, and once again they find the shades rolled up and the curtains on the floor. Silently, Jerry and Laura look at each other, and they decide that the curtain can just stay on the floor. They go back to the living room, and they just hope that that's the last of it. After about 30 minutes, there came a noise in the kitchen. When they went to look, they found that the curtain and curtain rods from the kitchen door were crumpled and just laying on the kitchen floor. They just stood there in silence a moment. Finally, Jerry just said,
"Whatever it is, it clearly doesn't like curtains."
They just quietly went back to the living room, once again, hoping that if they just ignored it, it'd go away.
This is Catholicism.
In less than an hour, the pounding would begin again, and it would grow in intensity. And the source says it was as if the very foundation of the house was alive and angry. Its noises almost seemed intelligent. It was so loud that all three of them, Jerry for the first time, had to put their hands over their ears. And they just waited. And like always, it just suddenly stopped. The family sat there for several moments in silence. They had made a point to not talk about it when it happened. They all just decided then to go to bed. They didn't even say, they just go,
sad.
Let's just go to bed. That's just the saddest thing.
It is sad, but at the same time, I also think it's kind of just, it's kind of just like, well, I guess we'll have to figure this out later, you know? Like,
Exactly.
I think it's not necessarily like defeated. I think it's just kind of like, well, I have to sleep now, so I guess we'll pick this up tomorrow.
Exactly. Well, the next day is Saturday, November 23rd. They go visit their cousin. They go to...
Oh, they still go to visit the cousin?
Yep, they get
Well,
out.
I guess they probably want to get out, I guess.
Yeah, they have mass, they have dinner, and then they go shopping. They have a wonderful time, and they get back home to their house on Lindley Street at about 4:30 p.m. that afternoon. They're feeling really good, so they're carrying in all the groceries and getting settled, and that's when Jerry noticed something weird. Marcy had a TV in her room that would just sit on this high shelf, and Jerry found it laying screen down on her bed. Thought that was strange, but he just picked it up, put it back where it belonged, and returned to the kitchen.
Oh, what do you mean he just thought that was strange?
Yeah. When Jerry reached the kitchen where Laura was, he immediately stopped dead in his tracks. Dishes from the sink were rising up and flying around the room. They began to smash one by one on the walls, the floor, the ceiling, and then they stopped. Silence. Jerry bent down to pick up a dish tray. And when he did, 5 knives rose out of the butcher's block and flew towards him from across the room. Laura darted back into the hallway, and Jerry just ducked to the floor, covered his face. Luckily, neither of them were hit by the knives.
Oh my God.
Silence again. Jerry slowly gets up. He looks over at Laura to make sure she's okay, and then he walks over to the butcher's block. He reaches out to touch it when all of a sudden, the butcher's block, which was fastened to the wall with screws, began to pry itself from the wall. Jerry jumps back. Suddenly the screws give way, and the butcher's block speeds right at Jerry. And like a total badass, though, Jerry caught it.
Oh my God. Amazing.
It just shot right at, and he just happened to catch it.
It pried itself out of, it was screwed
Yeah,
in the
to
wall?
the wall. Tore out like screws and all.
This is powerful.
Powerful. Very powerful.
Wow. This isn't, because usually with most poltergeists, most of the time, it's usually like, oh, things are kind of tossed around like paper or little objects or toys.
Exactly.
But this is getting something out of something that's screwed into a wall that's really, really rare.
Yeah. They're standing there horrified. And they're standing still because they're just waiting to see what happens next. Several moments go by, nothing happens. Very quietly, Jerry went and cleaned up the mess, and Laura put away the groceries. Then Jerry went out to the car to grab the remaining groceries, and Laura stayed in the kitchen. Laura's putting stuff away when she hears something behind her. She turns around and sees the 2 legs of the table closest to her have been lifted off the ground, and it just continues to rise higher and higher until it's completely turned over. The grocery bags, eggs, everything just get thrown. Laura screams, and the elevated side of the table came to rest on 2 of the dining room chairs. Laura's just standing there in terror. She looks over because she hears a noise, and she sees the 300-pound refrigerator lift and float about 6 inches off the ground.
Wow, this thing is sending a message.
Yeah. It slowly turned about a quarter of a turn to the right, and then was lightly put back down, standing at an odd angle. Next to Laura was the heavy wooden 23-inch television console that sat to the left of the sink.
23-inch.
Laura's caught up in what's happening. She's distracted. And that's when the TV tilted itself screen side down, falling flat on Laura's right foot.
Oh, no.
Heavy old fucking TV.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is a 70s TV, okay?
Laura screams, as you can imagine. Jerry had just been walking in with a bag of groceries. He's in their, porch. They have a screened-in porch area where there's a couch. He just tosses the groceries down on that couch there, and he runs into the kitchen, and he lifts the TV set off of her foot, sets her down. Her foot's really bloody.
Oh, God.
Jerry goes, gets some water, soaks her feet, cleans the wounds, dried her up, bandaged the foot.
Good Lord.
Fortunately, the house remained quiet for the rest of the night. Jerry put everything back in place, helped Laura with making dinner. Then after eating, Jerry helped Laura change the bandages on her foot because they had soaked through with blood.
Oh, wow.
Needless to say, the Goodmans were exhausted. Jerry went back to the kitchen to turn off the lights. And he gets to the kitchen and he stops. He can sense something in there.
Yeah, maybe stop going to the kitchen, Jerry.
He couldn't see anyone or anything, but it just felt like there was a person walking around the kitchen. He hears a thud to his left, and he looks over to see the kitchen table now tipped and leaning on a chair. Calmly, Jerry walks over to the table and puts it back where it went, turns off the light, returns to the living room. And the family, they just wanted to get their minds off of it. Marcy, she turned on the TV and they watched Emergency, was the show that was on, which was a big hit at the time. Well, when a commercial came on, Jerry headed back to the kitchen to make coffee. And he makes it, pours a few cups, goes to head back to the living room. And right as he's in the doorway of the kitchen, there's a loud screeching noise behind him, followed by a thud. He turns around. And once again, the kitchen table is flipped upside down and is now resting on top of a chair. The other chairs had been pushed away.
Wow.
So little Marcy met Jerry in the doorway. She took the coffees for him. Jerry just went to the table, righted it once again, turned off the kitchen lights, and returned to his family in the living room. You can feel this man breaking. You can feel his mind breaking.
I mean, how helpless must he feel?
The family is exhausted in every way a person can be. They just decided to call it a night, so they took Marcy in her room. Laura gets in bed in her and Jerry's room, and Jerry goes to the bathroom to shave. And as Jerry's lathering up his face, there comes a loud noise and the sound of Marcy screaming.
Oh, no.
Jerry runs out of the bathroom to Marcy's room in a flash, shaving cream still on his face, and Laura limping not far behind him. They get to Marcy's room, and her TV had fallen off the shelf once again and landed on her ankle.
Oh, God.
Jerry checked it. Thankfully, it wasn't injured. I'm sure it hurt, but it wasn't I'm sure it bruised, but it wasn't, injured. After making sure his daughter was okay, Jerry unplugged that fucking TV and just put it out in the hallway so it wouldn't even be near her. So by now, there was no way the family was going to get any sleep. Jerry wiped the shaving cream off his face, and the family decided to just go to the living room, and at least there they could just all be together.
Yeah.
So they settled in and flipped on a movie, which happened to be The Battle of the Bulge. And at one point during the movie, Marcy got up and went to the bathroom, when suddenly a noise came from the bathroom, and Jerry and Laura quickly went to investigate. The bathroom was in utter chaos. Little Marcy had her hands to her head, protecting it from flying objects. The curtain rod was whipping around the room. Towels were fluttering about. Shelves of toiletries were just being thrown about in any kind of bottle, like a Listerine bottle. They were just like popping out like they were erupting.
What the hell is going on?
Thankfully, little Marcy's unharmed, but the commotion was still going on in other parts of the house. Something was going on at that same moment in the bedroom. So Jerry runs to investigate, and once again the curtains are down. And when Jerry went to check out the kitchen, he saw that the curtains in Marcy's room had also come down once again. He's right, the thing doesn't fucking like curtains.
Yeah, damn.
Once the commotion did die down, the family, for the millionth time, picked the house up, tried putting it back in order, and they sat closely together in the living room until 3 a.m., which obviously is not like the Goodmans.
Right, no.
Finally, they tucked little Marcy in bed, and Jerry and Laura laid in their bedroom feeling helpless. But this was just Saturday. Hell Weekend still had another day to go.
Oh my God.
So now, it's Sunday, November 24th, 1974. Jerry was up that morning by 8:30, and he headed to the kitchen to make breakfast for the family. And once again, the kitchen table and the chairs had all been flipped. And obviously this was weird, but Jerry this time noticed something else. They weren't wakened by this. They didn't get woken up by this shit. This noise would have woken them up. And you have to imagine, with all the shit that's going on, if they're sleeping at all, it's probably the lightest fucking sleep.
Yeah, totally.
You know what I mean?
This is reminding me a lot of Amityville Horror.
Yeah.
And Parent Family Haunting, too.
Yeah.
For sure.
The refrigerator had moved too, and was now entirely blocking the outside kitchen door. Jerry removed the casters and center leaf from the dining room table, knowing that that would only make for more projectiles in the future. And on a funny note, the source says Jerry also remembered that Laura was going to cut his hair that day, which she always did in the kitchen. And obviously, scissors were not going anywhere near his fucking head inside that house.
Yeah, I think that's wise. Yeah.
I just thought that was funny that he remembered he was supposed to get a haircut, and he's like, fuck that.
He was like, let's maybe not. Yeah.
So, shocked by the state of the kitchen, Jerry goes back to the bedroom to tell Laura. Jerry had just started to say,
"Hun, you're never gonna believe this,"
when all of a sudden, it hit the fan.
Oh, God.
On the wall of the bedroom, there hung a silver crucifix and a portrait of Jesus that read, "Bless this home." Both the cross and the portrait flew off of the wall, taking the nails with them.
Oh, God.
Crashing onto the bedroom floor. Both Laura and Jerry are terrified. Laura scrambles out of bed. They run to each other and embrace. Jerry's trying to console her. Suddenly, there's a loud crash coming from Marcy's room. They rush over to her room. Her huge wooden bureau that Marcy had in her room had fallen over, just missing her arm where she slept.
Oh my God.
And of course, Laura was behind Jerry because she's limping. But when she got to the room, right as she entered the room, the crucifix that hung above the door inside of Marcy's room came off the wall and smashed onto the ground, nail and all. But this was with force. It was like something, not just like it fell off. This was like it got thrown.
Well, yeah, no, to bring the nail down with, yeah. Oh, God.
So everything is escalating and intensifying. So now they're desperate. They had tried avoiding reaching out for help because they were, aware of how crazy all this stuff sounded. But now they just reached a breaking point.
Yeah.
So Laura called her friends Harold and Mary Hoffman. Harold took off right away, headed over for the Goodmans. Mary stayed behind and called the police. Marcy was up now, so Jerry, Laura, and her headed out of the house to the enclosed porch. This is where that green couch was. In fact, the groceries were still on it from when Jerry tossed them there the night before when Laura screamed. They spotted Jane Halsworth out walking her dog. And as Jerry went to call for her, Laura screamed. Jerry turned around to see that the couch they had out there on that porch was hovering a foot or more off the ground. It just kept rising until it was about 4 feet off the ground.
4 feet? This stuff is so extreme.
Suddenly, it just slammed down to the ground, spilling the groceries everywhere. Laura just grabbed her daughter, and the two of them just cried. And Jerry called out to Janet, saying,
"Please, go get your father. We're in trouble here."
That's drama.
Janet ran with her dog into the house, calling for her father. And the Halsworth, like we said, good friends of the Goodmans. And Janet's father, John Halsworth, was the policeman. He's the one that I think when they recorded those knocking a little earlier, when they thought it was like an animal or something.
So yeah, he had been there before.
Right, so he's familiar with what's going on.
Something was happening.
Right, but this whole time they've thought it was just like hooligans.
Right, he knew that they were like going through some kind of mystery, but had no idea that it was paranormal or anything like that. Yes.
Right. So he quickly comes over. He could tell right away the family was just in a state of distress. Jerry tried his best to explain what was going on, saying that there was some sort of evil force that was just wrecking the house. And here's a moment I thought was kind of cool. You know, typically when this happens in the stories we cover, people get laughed at, or they're, But in this moment, when Officer John Halsworth heard what Jerry was telling him, he didn't even flinch. He didn't laugh. He didn't get mad. He just stayed stone-faced. Calmly, he told the family to just stay on the porch. He walked to the door of the house, looked in, and obviously could see right away the place was in shambles. He pulls a cigarette from the pocket of his jacket, lights it, and steps inside. He takes a deep drag from his cigarette, looks around the room, and asks,
"What the hell happened here?"
The entire house is wrecked. Furniture's tipped over, dishes and trinkets and all that stuff are smashed, thrown about. Then Jerry just shouts to John. He points, he goes, "The TV!" John turned to find that the TV that he just walked by had turned about 35 degrees from where it was just a moment ago. So, calmly, John just walks over, rights the TV, and right as he walks away, it moves again to the same spot, 35 degrees off center. And just then, the 3 reclining chairs in the living room began to vibrate and shake violently, rapidly opening and closing, reclining and unreclining, all at the same time.
Oh my God.
Without losing his cool, John just looks over, and he sees the refrigerator, too, begin to slide across the floor. And all the while, the fridge made no noise as it glided across the carpeted floor. And apparently, that's when John said,
"This looks like a poltergeist."
In complete silence, the fridge then jumped about 2 feet, bumping John in the elbow. Didn't hurt him or anything. It's like it wanted to get his attention. John just picked up the phone and called the station for backup. How dope is that?
Oh my God, what's his backstory?
I know.
Where's
Can you
his
imagine,
Netflix series?
Like this whole time, like this family probably didn't know that like he believed in all this shit. Like
I'm sure they had no clue.
How dope was it?
And that
How
he
dope
like
is that? Well, not long after this, Harold Hoffman, the member that Laura had called the Hoffmans, he pulls up, as well as officers Carl Leonzi and Joe Tomek, who were out on patrol. They got a call around 10 a.m. and headed over to the Goodman's house. And they were told to just see what was going on, but when they reported back, to do so on a landline in order to keep it private, rather than, on their radio just going, it's just a couple of wackos that think their house is haunted. They were like, give them some private, call back on a landline. Laura answered the door when they rang the bell. She didn't say a single word because she was crying so hard. She just pointed to the master bedroom. Marcy was in a recliner watching cartoons. Laura and Jerry led them to the bedroom. Obviously, right away, they could see the house was just, wrecked. They assumed that the Goodmans had been burglarized.
Oh, yeah.
And in fact, because, Laura, they were in a state of distress, Tomek even tried to comfort Laura, saying, "Don't worry, they're not going to come back." She's like, "You don't understand. It's not a they."
Yeah.
So Jerry explained the story. Tomek, he picked up the TV that had been toppled over, and less than a minute later, it was knocked over again. So Officer Tomek once again picks it up, sets it back on the bureau, and then they all watched as the TV began to lift off the ground and float in the air.
Wow.
Tomek walked over, examined it, couldn't see, didn't see any wires, shit like that. It began to swing back and forth like a pendulum, faster and faster. But then it slowed down, slower, and then it just lowered itself to the ground, setting itself down at about 45 degrees off from where it was. And Jerry explained to them that the objects would always be found like that, tilted at an angle, almost like this thing wanted them to see it, just like to play with them.
Yeah,
like it was a game.
It's very taunting.
Yeah. So by now, 2 other officers had arrived, a George Wilson and a Leroy Lawson. They join everyone in the kitchen, and the first 2 officers catch them up on everything. Now, despite everything Tomek had seen, he still wasn't ready to believe. And he asked the other guys, did they think this was a hoax? And that's when Tomek realized that the other officers were looking at something behind him. Their eyes were big. They were pointing. He turns and sees the refrigerator hit the floor hard. Bang! And when he asked what the hell just happened, they all answered in unison. It floated. They said they watched it come off the wall, rise about 6 inches from the ground, all while making no sound until it hit the floor.
Wow.
The officers flipped the fridge over and examined it from every angle to make sure it hadn't been rigged up, to do that sort of thing. They looked at the wall, the ceiling. There was nothing. They even went to the basement and checked underneath the floor where the fridge would be,
right.
To make sure there was no pulley system or trap doors or, whatever. Nothing. Everybody goes back to the living room. They're discussing the events. And that's when Tomek made an interesting observation. Laura and Jerry, of course, are absolutely distraught, as you'd expect.
Right.
Not only is the house haunted, but all their stuff has been destroyed.
Yeah.
Weirdly enough, though, Marcy is just sitting there watching cartoons as if nothing is wrong. Whenever there was a loud noise, she'd startle, she'd react to that, but she didn't seem afraid. She'd just go back to watching cartoons. And that was weird.
That's very odd. I mean, this is an incredibly traumatic and scary event.
Exactly.
But this does kind of remind me of earlier when she was with her friend.
Yes.
Her friend was on the end of the couch and levitated.
Right.
She was very calm about it.
Very true. By now, Officer Tomek, he's on the brink of accepting that this could be something unexplainable. And the source almost makes it seem like it was kind of an internal struggle for him.
I'm sure.
He had just seen The Exorcist a few months before, like everyone else. And so he was just trying to think, he was just trying to explain away that, it's just part of me that remembers that movie and is just trying to, but he was running out of logical explanations. So now it's about 11 a.m. on that Sunday morning. And Tomek calls the dispatcher to explain the situation, and he also asks that an ambulance come out to tend to Laura's foot.
Jeez, they got half the damn squad over here. Wow.
He even requested the fire department come out to check the foundation of the house, make sure that, the house wasn't falling apart.
Yeah, wow.
He also noted that there had been a lot of demolition going on nearby where a hospital was going in. They were using explosives to blow out the rocks, and so he also asked them to check in with the city. Maybe that had something to do with what was happening here. Once again, there came a loud noise, this time from Marcy's room. Once again, the large bureau in her room had been tipped over and was leaning against the wall. And Tomek, he understood that no one was in that room. He's thinking, okay, things are happening in every room of the house.
Yeah.
So him and the officers are now congregating in the hallway when they notice the gold wooden cross on the wall begin to turn. Almost like a clock hand, just spinning around and around in a circle, faster and faster, until suddenly it just ripped right off the wall, nail and all, hitting Officer Leroy in the chest. Officer Leroy loudly proclaimed that was enough, and he was out of there. He left the house, went to his patrol car, got inside, and locked the fucking door.
I mean, his mind was goddamn blown at that point.
So more and more people just keep showing up.
So you get more and more witnesses of this.
Yeah, and then the word gets out and press gets there and all. That's coming in part 2.
Oh, okay.
More than a few detectives and close personal friends of the Goodmans, they're all there. Each time someone new comes in, it wasn't long before they got their own eyewitness experience of all the weird shit going on. Also, now, whenever things would begin to start up again, there was also the smell of sulfur. The family was just on the verge of a mental breakdown. Strangers were now gathering outside the house. One woman who apparently wasn't closely affiliated with the family just invited herself in, saying they need to put a bowl of vinegar in every room.
At least she had advice, a tip.
Well, word was out. The place is haunted. So police actually had to make everyone disperse, get them away from the house. The deputy fire chief, Zwierling, was one of the people now present in the home, and he also got a first-hand look at all the strange shit happening. And he knew whatever it was not a job for the police or the fire department. So he called the firehouse department's chaplain, Father Doyle. He explained the best he could what was happening, and he asked that, Doyle come to help out. And so Zwierling drives out to pick up Father Doyle, and while he's gone, a few things happened. Marcy was sitting in her green recliner when it rapidly reclined and unreclined 3 times until poor Marcy just left out of it. Jerry scooped her up in his arms. He took her to the kitchen as the entire chair flies backward to the floor and dishes began to fly off the rack.
Oh my God.
So Zwierling returns with Father Doyle. The officers who were there had been examining the recliner, and they all saw what had happened, and they explained what had happened to Father Doyle. Father Doyle sits in the chair, tries to make it recline, but it won't budge. He's like struggling with it, trying to get it to budge. It won't budge. And then that's when Father Doyle felt a wave of heaviness, of tiredness, of just overtake him. He instantly knew there was something in the house. Calmly, he says,
"There's an evil spirit in this place."
Father Doyle decided the best thing to do first was perform a standard blessing. So he took a seat in a recliner next to Officer Tomek and opened up his little leather kit.
I'm just glad they had so many recliners to offer.
Yeah. Well, in his leather kit, he's got what you'd expect: rosary beads, holy water, a Bible. He sets the bottle of holy water next to him on the end table, gets everything else out, gets his Bible, and he reaches out to grab the holy water from the end table. And right before his hand touches it, it quietly falls over just a little bit out of reach. Father Doyle pauses a moment, probably kind of curious, so he sets the bottle back up, waits a moment, and then reaches for it again. Once again, before his hand touches it, the bottle falls over, slightly out of reach. Father Doyle then calmly put the holy water and everything else back in the leather kit, saying that it was probably best not to disturb the spirits until the exorcist came.
That is a wise, wise man.
He said a prayer to bless the house, and then he got on with Father Alphonse Tribo, an exorcist. Next to walk in was an ambulance driver and the city doctor, and after some coaxing, they were finally able to get Laura to go to the hospital to get her foot treated. Jerry's brother Edmund was also present. He was standing with his back to the door when suddenly outside he heard one of the officers shout,
"It's coming from the cat. I heard it say bye-bye."
What?
He was having an argument with a superior officer. Edmund looked over and saw Marcy just holding her little cat, Sam, innocently. Outside, though, he could hear the officers in a heated exchange.
"You can have my job before I'll go back inside that house."
He heard the cat talk?
Now, the next to arrive was a woman named Mary Pasquarella, friend of the family. Mary was a part of the Psychic Research Center in New Haven, and she had an interest in this sort of stuff. She came over, and right away, she could sense something was not right in the house. But she, though, had connections with people that might be able to help. In fact, she knew a specific couple that had become well known for their work in the paranormal field. It was time to call Ed and Lorraine Warren. And that's where we're going to end Volume 1
Oh my god.
of the Bridgeport Poltergeist.
Oh my goosh. Wow. I am very scared. Freaked out. Wow.
You like
oh
that?
my gosh. I cannot.
The
I'm so interested
The
to see.
Warrens are coming to town.
The Warrens, mommy and daddy, are coming out. They're ready. They're going to help us, okay?
They are coming to town. And let me tell you something.
Okay.
It only gets scarier.
Oh my god. This
We
is
got talking cats. We've got demonic voices. We've got actual apparitions that manifest.
Oh, come on.
It only gets more crazy from here.
Oh my god, I cannot wait for part 2.
That's right.
Or volume 2.
That's
if that's what
right.
we're calling it. But Dylan, thank you so much for doing that incredible research.
Of course, thank you.
What a lovely, lovely episode. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a like, a subscribe, a rating, share, just posting on your social media about us really is really great. Just kind of spreading the good word of Creep Street, baby. But thank you guys so much for listening.
All right. And of course, if you want to support this show, go to patreon.com/Creep Street Podcast. Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
And this is Creep Street. Good night and goodbye.